from different employment agencies and organizations across various industries, and it's brought to you by Beam Career Ventures. I'm Natasha Rodriguez. I'm a grad student here in sociology and also the Beam Social Impact Student Industry Associate. And today in our audience, we have 3 different students. If you could introduce yourselves.
Hi, my name is Lisa Yu. I recently graduated last spring in the International Comparative Program with a PhD, and now I'm postdoc working with Francisco Ramirez in the School of Ed.
Hi, I'm Sandra Nakagawa. I'm a 6th year PhD student in sociology.
My name is Marian Kiddo. I recently graduated from the Sociology department with a PhD, and I'm working at Stanford Institutional Research Institute.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so today we have with us Jennifer Laird, who is a PhD sociology graduate from Stanford, and she's coming to us from RTI International. So if you could give us a brief introduction, that'd be great, Jen.
Yeah, great. So I was in the sociology department from 94 to 99. I'm at RTI International. We're a nonprofit multidisciplinary research organization. We're quite large. I have 3,700 colleagues across the US and internationally. We have 11 US offices and some international offices. We're unified by the mission of using research to improve the human condition. And I am in the Education and Workforce Development group, and specifically in a center called Center for Evaluation and Study of Educational Equity. And I have been here, actually, my postgraduate school career started at the American Institutes for Research, AIR, which at that point had a Palo Alto office. I think they now have a San Mateo office. And I was there for a few years, and then I transferred. I wanted to move to the East Bay, so looked for some opportunities in the East Bay, and at that point joined an organization called MPR Associates, which was merged with RTI about 4 years ago. So when you think about the MPR and RTI experience, I've actually been here for 13 years.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so can you tell us a little bit about what your current position at RTI is like? Walk us through a typical day or different tasks.
Sure. So I have, I'm a senior researcher and program director. It's probably best if I walk through a typical week. And so I work across a number of projects, and typically some researchers might be on one very large project, but I'd say typically folks have maybe 3 to 4. If you're on more than 4 projects, that can be a little bit dicey to juggle. So most folks work across a portfolio of projects and are also often working to bring in some new projects or doing new research development. So a typical work week for me tends to involve some meetings with partners that I'm engaged in research with, and actually most recent, the last few years I've gotten involved in evaluating various educational programs and also collaborations. There's a term out there now that you all might have heard of called collective impact, and it's where funders, usually a group of funders, come together to fund a group of collaborators who have come together to cross-sector, sometimes cross-location, to address a really important social problem. And they do so in a collaborative way. So we've been evaluating a number of those initiatives. So a typical week involves some meetings around those projects. So for example, tomorrow I'm flying up and back to LA to participate in a partnership meeting for one of our projects in LA. And there I'm there to describe the work we're going to be doing as we're serving an evaluative role for this team. So introducing the work we're planning to do, and also sort of observing and hearing about how their collaborations are developing. And then I have some other meetings, similar type meetings, although more local. And sometimes those happen via phone. This other one will be in San Francisco. So some project-based meetings or data collection, observation tend to happen within a week. I'm also drafting a final report for a project that we've been evaluating for 2 years. So that's both working with some staff to finish analyzing some quantitative data we have. We have 1 or 2 more interviews to do, so completing that, and then actually drafting the report, which will go to the client, they'll review, we'll go back and forth, and ultimately it'll go to the partnership, and this partnership publicly releases the evaluation reports. So I know that's down the pike. So work around that, and then also am actively involved in some proposals right now. So we, the way we become involved in work is often we're responding to either what's called a request for proposals or request for information. We do a lot of work for the U.S. Department of Ed. We do work for various foundations, nonprofits, state departments of ed. And so what often happens is that group will let out what's called an RFP, a request for proposals, and they might do it publicly. It might show up on the Federal Registry, or they might invite particular groups sort of by invitation only. So that's a proposal I'm working right now was by invitation only. We submitted a written proposal. We were a finalist, so we had a finalist interview yesterday, and now have a final set of questions to respond to in 2 days. And so that I have, those are project meetings, project work, new project development, and then also some internal sort of staffing meetings. So for example, in my center, we have a monthly meeting. We had that Monday, and we have staff across our offices. And so we're coming together. Typically, sometimes somebody's highlighting a project so we can learn more about what each other is doing. We often go through the various proposals folks are involved with, so people know what work we're going after and where that stands. And if there's a need, let's say I'm working on a proposal and I could really use some support with the proposal development, that's a place where I can kind of raise my hand and see if folks are interested and available. And then every Friday, I lead a group within our center, and we're across offices and work on different things. And so we have just sort of a water cooler 30-minute call every Friday where we just get on the line and we just share highs and lows of our work week. And that's a way for us to stay connected, not feel so isolated in our various offices, and also have a chance to informally hear about each other's work. My schedule is pretty regular. So I'm in our Berkeley office. There's some mornings when I feel I need to get in early, so I do, but I have flexibility to, as needed, to leave early, as long as I'm sort of getting my work done. I don't necessarily check in with anybody about that. And yeah, and sometimes I do have, I was on a few projects that had me going to DC quite a bit. So there were a number of years when I would go to DC, or I had a project in Seattle I would go to. I have one in Arizona. So this year there's been more single-day trips, but I have certainly had times when I had multi-day trips across the country.
Great. Okay. Can you share a couple of things that you really like about your current position and working at RTI? Yeah, so RTI is a very collaborative organization. So there's not, we're collectively trying to do really good and worthwhile work. So I like that a lot. I like my internal collaborations. I have great colleagues here. I also really appreciate my external collaborations. So particularly in the last few years, I've gotten involved in evaluating some education programs and different collective impact efforts. I've had a much greater opportunity to interact and observe and collaborate with practitioners, whether that be educators, educational leaders, child welfare leaders, advocates, some really great advocates in the field that I'm studying, which is the education of foster youth and probation youth, some philanthropic leaders, youth themselves. That has been a huge, wonderful sort of expanding of my professional work as to actually engage more with youth and students directly, and some communications firms and strategy firms. So that's a great part about my job, is my external collaborations. Thanks. So you talked about what a typical week for you would look like. Would you say that that's consistent throughout the year, or are there certain times that are more or less busy for you? Yeah, I can definitely have busy spells. They're not really, there was a time when, for example, summer seemed to be a really busy proposal season. That was maybe 10 or 15 years ago. I forget if it was because the federal government tended to let out their proposals there, but that's now
there's not a single busy proposal season. It's a year-round activity. And then so certainly my work can ebb and flow, especially since I work across maybe 5 projects. Sometimes deadlines collide, or a really interesting proposal opportunity drops in our lap, what we were not expecting, but we want to go for it. So I've got to, spend more time, spend weekend and evening times doing work. And then there are times, there's not too many times when it's really slow or quiet, but there are less hectic times, I would say, but not predictable by season.
So you came from the Stanford Sociology PhD program. Are there particular skills from your experience as a grad student that you think you use now in your position?
Yeah, I mean, well, certainly at that point there was I imagine there still is really strong quantitative training that proved to be quite helpful. I would say both in my position at AIR and here, it's I personally do less of the really sophisticated quantitative modeling. There are some positions in the research world, non-academic research world, where that is important. It doesn't happen to be for my particular role, but I have some colleagues here at RTI that do continue to do that. So I would say being able, comfort with quantitative data, being able to write about quantitative data in a way that is accessible to non-researchers is key. Some of my colleagues do a lot of publishing in academic journals, and then other of my colleagues, myself included, do not. We do policy briefs. There's our clients, which are often foundations, or that is not what they need. They need a policy brief, a research brief, and they're asking for shorter and more visual infographic type things. So that I did not learn at Stanford. I hope there's some focus on that now, because it's really important to be able to produce research and present it in ways that non-academics, that it's accessible and engaging to them. Yeah. And then I didn't have strong qualitative training at Stanford, and that is proved to be really important in my research. And so that I learned in my first positions at AIR and here at MPR. And then what's really critical, which I guess in writing a dissertation and working on professors' projects, you get this, but project management, communication with clients and colleagues, and being just a collaborative team player is totally critical. And I think I got that. I worked with Sandy Dornbush, and we had a research team of a few graduate students, and I learned some. That was a good collaborative practice, I would say, but different in a professional setting.
You mentioned AIR just now. Can you walk us through your thinking when you were finishing up your graduate program, thinking about the types of employment you were going for, like how you chose AIR?
Yeah, so I pretty early on, so I did the PhD in 5 years, and definitely by year 1, I was really questioning whether I wanted an academic career, and by year 2 or 3, I knew I didn't want an academic career, so I started to think about and look for what else, and I didn't want an academic career for a few reasons. One, I felt really drawn geographically. I knew I wanted to stay in the Bay Area for a number of family personal reasons, and so I was not mobile, and that of course really limits you if you're looking for an academic career. 2, I had gone to graduate school because I wanted to use research to help solve social problems, and I didn't, at that time, the sociology department I did not have a strong sense of that among the faculty, certainly on a theoretical level, I felt that, but I didn't on a real practical, like how do you go about doing that? I did not feel like I had strong mentors in that area. So I felt like I had to sort of quietly investigate that on my own. It was, and so I did do that. Sandy, my advisor, was great. He did know of some non-academic options and linked me. He called one of his partners or collaborators, research partners at AIR in the Palo Alto office and said, my student wants to come do an informational interview. She's great. And I went up for the informational interview and was like offered a job right there. So that was pretty awesome. But I did something, it was I think it was the summer after my 3rd year. I did a summer fellowship that just opened up my eyes incredibly. And I'm not sure that it exists anymore, but it was called Putting Children First. And it was through Columbia's Teachers College. And it was for doctoral students in the social sciences who were advanced doctoral students, so finishing up their dissertations, who had an interest in policy or practice work. And so we spent the summer in New York at Teachers College, and we were placed in policy settings, and I was placed at the Children's Defense Fund. So I spent 4 days a week at the Children's Defense Fund as sort of like an intern working on a research policy project. And then 1 day a week with the other fellows in a workshop setting. And that was awesome to be connected with doctoral students across the country. I think there were about 15 of us from all different universities who were all in PhD programs and wanting to do policy relevant work. And so those connections with those students and seeing the types of policy jobs helped me to get excited about a career after graduate school.
That's great. Yeah, so I have more questions here, but I do want to say anyone in our audience is welcome to offer questions if anything comes up for you. But just
just to follow up with your question about academia, I was curious about, I think, the rigor of the research that you guys do, considering your clients and what they desire. Is it as rigorous as academic standards, or does it really depend on the project? And then my second question was about the grants that you guys are applying for, about funding and I guess just about salary and how that works.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, there's a range of sort of rigor, and I'm putting this in quotes and purposes. There is a range of rigor. There's some work that is done that the randomized control trials, and then there's other work that's not appropriate or needed for the partners we're working with. So if they're innovating in a really complex space and they are tweaking their intervention continually, it's my job as a evaluator to be in partnership with them and to be providing ongoing formative information to help them navigate and make mid-course corrections. And so that's not typically something that an academic does. So there's absolutely a range. We do a lot of work for the U.S. Department of Ed. They have very strict statistical guidelines and style guidelines. They're not, again, super methodologically sophisticated, and on purpose, they're less comfortable producing and publishing research with really sophisticated models because those are based on all sorts of assumptions, whereas the federal government needs to be a little more conservative in the statements they make about the data they have, and leave it to researchers to make larger inferential modeling and all of that. And then in terms of, yes, we go after so my salary is essentially covered by the projects I work on. So, and it's not like if I'm low on projects, I don't get paid, but essentially the way my company, my nonprofit covers me is I work on a series of projects. Each of those projects has a budget. We're given funding to do that project. And so then I essentially charge my time across my projects. So there is definitely, there is the pressure of knowing that there's enough work coming in to cover you and your staff. I've never been in a position where I or any of my close colleagues has been laid off because we didn't have coverage. I've been fortunate to be in organizations that have continually been able to bring in a lot of new work. So, and it does mean that unlike an academic where you can really develop your absolute own research agenda and pursue it exactly the way you want to, that's not what happens here. You can certainly have research interests and specialize and have expertise, but if you have this amazing esoteric research interests and nobody wants to pay you to do it, no foundation, no government agency, no nonprofit wants to pay you to do it, then yeah, then that can be a downside for somebody who wants to do that. In terms of, I think our salaries are really competitive, and particularly since we're on a 12-month salary. From what I experienced as a new PhD and what I have experienced in recently hiring new PhDs, it's definitely competitive to tenure track positions, and of course pays more than if you don't have a tenure track research position and you're piecing together some things. And yeah, so.
I was interested in, you talked about how basically you got your first job through an informational interview, and I just wanted to hear a bit more about how you made the transition from PhD to your first job. You know, what was your dissertation on? You know, did that matter, and how did you sort of market yourself in terms of getting jobs in this kind of work?
Yeah, well, I can talk about my experience, and also we've recently hired a number of PhDs, so I can talk about what it was also, what I, as somebody a little more senior, hiring somebody coming out, I can tell you how that, my perspective of that process. So for me, my dissertation was education related. I happened to be analyzing data from the U.S. Department of Ed. I think that probably helped. So it was an education topic, so I had some expertise in education, which is what I was then applying for. It was using data, similar types of data that I would have used in my first position, so I think that was helpful. And in terms of actually making the connection, yes, I think I got lucky that my advisor introduced me to somebody who was looking for somebody, and I got hired that way. And then after that, I didn't really pursue like publishing my dissertation or turning it into a book or anything. I have some colleagues here who are doing that now. And they can get some resources from our organization. It's called the Professional Development Award, where they get essentially time to do that. And certainly as we're hiring new PhDs, we're very interested in their dissertation work, the substantive areas, as well as methodological choices they made and skills that reflects. So it's that we, and I'm trying, this last, and we, but there, well, I had to do a job talk coming out, and but we have not like had new PhDs do job talks. They certainly go through a rigorous interview process that can last, you know, they start interviewing 1 or 2 people, then the team expands, and then, you know, then they might spend a full day here getting interviewed by all sorts of folks. And they'll be asked about their dissertation, and but not a formal job talk.
I mean, can you talk about cases in which you had a PhD coming in who didn't have, for example, an education focus, but was sort of transitioning from, you know, a less relevant substantive field, but had a lot of methodological expertise, perhaps, or does that happen?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I guess from education, we get folks from, in our group, we get sociologists, statisticians, education PhDs, policy masters and PhDs. I'm trying to think if we've had, like, I'm not aware of like a literature PhD. I think that might be a little, not sure that they would be hired as a researcher. I think there might be right off the bat. Yeah, so I think certainly to have some substantive area of knowledge is quite important. Like one of the people we just hired, she her research was on school leadership and mentoring of teachers. And actually the project she's joined didn't exactly line up with that, but we could tell she had a lot of the types of skills we needed for the projects that we were hiring for, including she was a really clear, personable presenter. We could tell that we could, you know, after some site visits or client meetings or partner meetings, we absolutely were going to feel comfortable sending her on a 3-day site visit by herself, because we could just tell by the way she carried herself and interacted with folks that she was going to have that confidence and clear presentation that would be a good fit. Yeah.
Can you talk about some of the other things that you look for in applicants? Like on the, I'm not sure what the application process looks like.
Yeah, so we, so typically, jobs get posted, and then within our informal network, they get posted on RTI website and through LinkedIn, and then we also try to make sure that we let our colleagues, hey, I'm looking for such and such, can you reach out to your networks? And so broadly do that. And then applications come through. We have an HR department that does an initial screen to, there are some folks who just clearly it's not an appropriate match. We're looking for a PhD level and they're a bachelor's level. So if I'm the hiring person, I will then be given maybe, I think for this last round that we hired for, there were maybe 15 or 20 resumes and cover letters that came to me, from which we interviewed. We were really excited to interview 4 strong candidates, and then we invited 2 back for finalists, and we chose 1. And in that, we're certainly looking at their CV and their sets of experience. We always ask for writing samples, and for that, we're looking for clear writing. If it's an academic journal, great. If they have other writing samples that are more like policy briefs or attractive displays of data, that gets us excited. And then then it was a pretty formal interview process, and that they were coming and meeting with different folks, and they had, of course, opportunities to ask questions, and then we made an offer, and she accepted, and then she joins.
I had a question about, so that your interest in leaving the academic track was partially to do research that had social impact or was more directly applied than academic research. Is there like a particular project or example of something you worked on in your time that you can really say, like, oh yeah, I really saw the impact there, was able to provide some useful.
Yeah. So there's a couple projects I'm involved in right now that are evaluating initiatives aimed at better supporting the educational outcomes and experiences of foster youth. And so it's typically the child welfare and education systems have been very separate. And in fact, there have been some privacy laws keeping schools from knowing even who their foster youth are. But what that did was really siloed students' experiences, and the education system didn't understand the trauma and that the students were going through, and the child welfare system were so concerned with safety and child welfare issues that turning to education just rarely made it on their list of responsibilities for foster youth. So it was really raising awareness and building partnerships across these organizations to better support foster youth. So there have been some demonstration projects in some counties in California and in Arizona. And so as the evaluators, we're collecting quantitative and qualitative data from the outset of the development of the design of the program, and helping them by bringing those data to them and doing what's sometimes called sense-making sessions. We call them what, so what, now what discussions, where we help to, with them, identify what's working, what's not working, what could be some pivot points, and ways we can improve the services that you're providing to these students, and ultimately then support their educational outcomes and experiences. And so we've had a number of opportunities to say, this doesn't seem to be working, these are the concerns we're bringing back to you, does that resonate with you? Yes, no, well then let's think about some possibilities. So a really recent example was one of the partners, they had been using this particular technology tool to support their case planning and ed teaming, and that tool was being phased out by the vendor, and so they needed to develop, come up with a new solution, and they were headed in one direction, and then I was involved in a focus group with a group of practitioners who had provided feedback on the next generation tool, but somehow felt like they weren't communicating their sort of specifications clear enough. So I knew they were saying, no, we really knew this. And I knew that they were about to choose the next vendor and go in this direction. And I said, hey, are you comfortable with me, rather than waiting until I'm done with all my 21 various interviews and writing up my report, are you comfortable with me bringing this to the leaders right now? Because they're about to pivot and away from the way you're talking. And they said, yes, absolutely. So I called the leaders up that day and I said, could we talk quickly? And it's led to, they kind of halted for a moment, went down to really hear the experience of these practitioners, and are pivoting kind of in a middle of the road way, and have asked me to come down into December when they have their new vendor to help be a part of the discussion of what technology tool is going to best serve their work with students.
Great. Okay, well, thank you so much for speaking with us about RTI. I want to give you the opportunity to, plug for any positions you might be hiring for now in the Berkeley office or somewhere else for RTI.
Yeah. So we in our center, we recently did a few hires. So I don't anticipate the Center for Evaluation and Educational Equity hiring any soon, but we have, in addition to my center, there's a P12 center, and I know that they are working on some really big proposals that, should any of those come, I imagine they would be hiring. And then I think one of you mentioned that you're in the comparative ed. We have a big an international group. It's called IDG. It's International Education and Development, and there's a number of big internationally funded research projects. Actually, there was just a group of Nigerian education leaders spending the week here with some of my colleagues, because they've just done a very large, I think first of its kind education survey that is representative of the country. And there's a lot of, I know we do a lot in early literacy and in low resourced developing countries. So if you're interested in any of that, I'd be happy to put you in contact. That's a really big, active group.
Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing and for being here.
Sure. Thank you.